Our speaker tonight is Léonie Rosenstiel, and she has been a member of SouthWest Writers for a very long time. I'm not sure how many years, but I will tell you she's a best-selling author, editor, and contributor to all kinds of different things. She's written several books, mostly around things like legal protections and guardianships. And so I think she's quite an expert on that, but she also is very interested in AI. And about a year ago, she did one of these meetings and talked about AI. And this year, she's come back and revisited it and is asking the question, should we be afraid? So since I was watching a robot on the news tonight, getting ready, working in the Amazon warehouse, I was really thinking about this topic because they were talking about AI with this robot that is working in the Amazon warehouse. So anyway, I will stop sharing at that and let Léonie take over the meeting.
Okay. The question is basically not should we be afraid, but should we be very afraid? Because there are all kinds of degrees of that. And I've kind of been dealing with the whole idea of automation, thinking machines since I was a kid reading science fiction. And so the whole concept wasn't new to me when it surfaced. And actually, my involvement with AI and Southwest Writers goes back several years. I did 3 articles, a series of 3 articles, and I was going to do a 4th article, but then they changed the format of the Sage. And they said, well, why don't you do an update? So I did an update instead of another article. And then they said, why don't you update us again? And so here I am tonight. And I'm going to recap very, very briefly some of the things that I was talking about last time, because I'm going to update all of them. Last time I spoke, we were watching a lot of unauthorized uses of academic and legal writing, and that had come into the news recently. And I'm going to talk a little bit about whether that has changed or how that has changed. The second thing was AI was hallucinating, and that fed into some of the things that happened with the unauthorized uses of AI, because when they were discovered, it didn't go too well for the authors. I will talk a little bit about how to minimize the downsides of AI. There are a couple of new wrinkles to that from last time. And we did discuss a little bit some of the things that happened when humans who were a little less than stable were interacting with AIs, and AIs were letting them convince themselves to do all sorts of unpleasant or improper or difficult things that they probably should not have been doing. It was not good for them. And so I'm going to update you on what's going on there. Last time I spoke, this one lawsuit had been filed. It was a lawsuit by the Authors Guild against AI. And it had as plaintiffs some very famous authors. I'm going to update you on that suit, and I'm going to talk about one that was recently, they called it a tentative settlement or a partial settlement, and it is not a complete settlement of what's going on that is a problem. And so let me just go that. A lot of you may have heard that a federal judge dismissed Sarah Silverman's suit against OpenAI, but he didn't dismiss it as being without merit. He dismissed it because he said she had made the wrong argument. And I'll tell you what happened to that suit as well. So, first thing happened, the American Bar Association started to tackle the problem of attorneys not telling anybody and using AI written legal papers. First thing they did in 2024, this was after I spoke the first time, they said all citations must be verified by humans. in all AI generated legal papers. And that's the name of the opinion that they gave for attorneys. Now, the areas affected were numerous. Is the attorney competent? Now, when you go to an AI like OpenAI, that is not a confidential conversation you're having. So if attorneys are supposed to give clients confidentiality, if they go to OpenAI and tell the OpenAI all about their client's case, it's no longer private. So that's an issue as well. Communication with clients, did they tell the client that they had AI write the brief for them? Or does the client think they spent hours writing it? Candor with the court also believes that the attorney has done his own work. Again, that's a question of trust and verification. And supervisory responsibilities, I mean, even if a paralegal does a lot of legal research for an attorney, the attorney is still supposed to check it over. What was happening here was that the attorneys were saying to AI, I want you to generate a brief on this subject. We want to take this position. We want to argue this position. Give me the citations, write the brief. And AI was very obliging and wrote the brief. And that was the problem. And the question about fees is an interesting one, since most attorneys bill in increments of 6 minutes. You can generate a lot more briefs if you generate one brief every minute, which AI can probably do for you if it's a 10-page brief, than you can if you have to write them yourself. And that's a question of veracity as well. Are you going to tell your client the truth that you put the problem into AI and AI just spit out the papers for you? That's a question of honesty with your clients. And the concomitant fees that go with that, should they be as high as they often are for an attorney for 6 minutes? So that's another whole problem. And here are some things that happened as a result of that. There's actually now 2 databases of AI generated briefs from all over the world. Damien Charlatan is a British guy who is now living in Paris, and his database has 427 cases in it. There's another one I like a little less. This is a very clean database. It doesn't have blank spaces. It doesn't have things that look raggedy. The other one is a little bit raggedy, and I don't know whether I trust it. It has a lot more cases in it, but my question is, it's not tidy. And so maybe I'm prejudiced against it. What I have done in the notes is I have put all of the original source material so that it's linked and you can find the original documents easily. Just click on the link and it'll take you to any original document that I've discussed tonight. I want to make sure you know that I'm not hallucinating any of these documents. They're all real, and some of them are truly wild. That's why I'm saying it. You'll have fun. If you are a writer, a fiction or nonfiction, it doesn't matter. I would be surprised if you don't come away with a couple of ideas for things that you want to think about or write about. Second item was, for the first time, an entire law firm was disciplined. Before this, it was just individual attorneys. But in this one law firm, in this one case, they discovered that it went through several levels of the law firm and nobody checked it. So it was an AI generated legal paper that was filed with the court and nobody had checked it before it was filed. They signed it, they just didn't read it and they didn't check the references. And the Sarah Silverman case that was dismissed as being wrong has now been rolled into, they call it consolidated, with another case. So that case is not dead. That case has been resuscitated and lives still. Okay. Problem is AI is still hallucinating. And it isn't going to be perfect. Humans are not perfect either. But when AI hallucinates and you don't check it, that's when you get into really big trouble. And look at the range of possible ability to do wrong, anywhere from 33% to 79%. That's quite a range. So, and that's just one AI. There are multiple AIs out there. They've only released the figures for this one. And the figures vary from one source to another. So you can't be absolutely certain that it's 33% or 79%. Maybe it's 80%. Maybe it's 90%. Who knows? This is a figure that's being released. And it made me a little bit nervous today. I was looking at a video for some drones that are not really drones, they're autonomous fighter jets, little bitty, well, they're not big fighter jets. They're small because there's no human in the cockpit, because there's no cockpit. And it's all run by AI. Now, when you're talking about what is the failure rate, what is the error rate, and you have, 50 of these planes flying in the sky, and each one of them has maybe a 90% accuracy rate, where do they go and what do they do with the other with the other 10%? So I'm thinking about the error rates here, and it makes a difference what their error is about, I think. Now, you can also induce AI to hallucinate. It might not be something you want to do, but a lot of people say, I'm going to write, a paper, give me 10 reasons why this is true. And the AI will oblige you. It will give you 10 reasons. 5 of them may be completely invented, and the other 5 may be correct. And so you need to avoid telling it that you want a certain number of items, because it will give you that number of items. If you say, list the main reasons why such and such is true, that may cut down on the hallucination. And another way to do it is to say, please do not hallucinate. In other words, just tell me what you know and don't invent anything, because it will create the rest of them. I did discuss this in my last presentation, and that is AI considers itself to be entertainment. It does not consider itself to be your research aid. And so if you ask it to be your research aid, you have misunderstood what it thinks it's supposed to be programmed to do. It's supposed to satisfy you. Anthropic, which is the firm that just settled the lawsuit, discovered that its own AI, Claude, which it called Claudius for some reason as part of this experiment, could not stock its own vending machine and didn't know how to make a profit. It hadn't been programmed, either hadn't been programmed properly or couldn't use its data banks to access that information. And I'm going to talk about Claudius again later. The employees like to play games with it and got it to do things like ordering metal cubes to stock the refrigerator. So when you have a group of people who are used to playing tricks, AI can be used in ways that were not intended. And here are some of the abuses that were going on this year. Some people may have heard about this one. As a summer reading list, the Chicago Sun-Times published 15 books that it was recommending that people read. And they discovered that 10 of those books didn't exist. The authors' names were real authors' names, but the names of the books had been fabricated. They weren't real books. So the Chicago Sun-Times published an apology. This is kind of like the dog ate my homework. It claimed that the King Features Syndicate was at fault here because they used material from the King Features Syndicate. So you can blame whoever you want to. The books were not real books. Deloitte is a huge international consulting and accounting firm, and they're based in London. They wrote a report for the Australian government on a $440,000 fee. And it was later discovered that a lot of the references, because the report was written by AI and not checked over by somebody in authority at Deloitte, were fictional. And so it refunded a good part of that fee. But it also, at the same time, issued a statement saying it would have come to the same conclusion in its report, even without those references. It kind of sounds like covering yourself a little bit. Then there's another problem, which is potentially more dangerous. And that is there's a program called OpenAI Whisper, which is a dictation program. And it hallucinates. When it hallucinates and you're transcribing medical records, it's very dangerous, I would think. I can tell you an experience that I had years ago before AI. And that was I was in an accident and I had a concussion, and my attorney sent me to a neuropsychologist for evaluation to see, what are we going to claim? How is this going to go? And the neuropsychologist interviewed me and showed me the transcript of the interview. And I looked at this and I said, that's not true. And he said, what are you looking at? I said, you said I don't like dissident music. I said, I love Peter, Paul, and Mary. What's your problem? He said, well, it's dissident music. I said, no. I said, after the accident, I could not listen to dissonant music. Dissonant, like cacophony, not dissident, like Peter, Paul, and Mary. So you do have to be careful because it will make these changes that you don't mean it to. And this happens in minor AI as well, like Word. If you have a correction program in Word, it can correct your word to a different word that it thinks you should have meant. And you've got to watch that really carefully because you may end up saying things you never intended to do. Now, OpenAI has been warning people not to use this program for sensitive situations where words are important, where changing a word could change someone's life. And these are situations where it could change someone's life if there's a phony diagnosis or a false listing of a treatment. So you need to be careful with that. And if you know that a hospital is doing it, the hospital needs to stop using that program. Minimizing downsides. You need a basic knowledge of a subject yourself. And I can tell you that as an experiment, I signed into a couple of courses on how to create books with AI. And you can do it. But if you're going to do it responsibly, you need to know the subject because it still can hallucinate. It still can tell you to put a chapter in about something that may not be relevant, or it may tell you that the conclusion is X when the conclusion should be Y. So you need to be careful. And one of the things you can do if you really want scholarly sources is tell it to use scholarly sources. State in the prompt that you allow it to say, I don't know, if there isn't data to support what it should be saying or what it could be saying if you let it hallucinate. Make the prompt very limited and very, very specific. Ask it to give you only verifiable references. I don't understand why people will go to AI instead of something like Google Scholar, which is a database of scholarly articles, or one of the other databases of scholarly articles. Google Scholar is free. You don't have to pay to access it. So I would like to suggest that instead of asking AI for a list of references, go to a real database and get a real list of references that you don't have to worry about it. You can usually click right on a link in that list that you get and go right to the article, the original article. Always verify. Human verification is absolutely, absolutely necessary. Also, you need to keep thinking so you don't forget how. It's a muscle that if you do not exercise it, it will go flaccid and you will not be able to use it. I can't tell you how many people I see when I say to them, you know, do you know something about this? And they'll say, let me look at my phone. It's all in the phone, it's not in their head. I said, what happened? I'll say to them, what happens if you can't use your phone? What happens if your computer goes off? Do you forget everything or do you not remember anything to start with? That's another problem. Really another problem. Now, the Authors Guild has created a set of guidelines for using AI in writing. And what they're basically saying is use only minor AI like spell checker or grammar checker. And I don't even like grammar checker because I very often, you know, might start a sentence with the word and or but for emphasis. A lot of people do that now. That's not unusual, but know that you're doing it and don't let it correct you if that's not what you meant. Okay, here's some problems that are going to exist. They actually already exist because I see these ads on the internet all the time. You know, get Adobe and you'll be able to have all your contracts analyzed and you don't have to worry about it, and it'll tell you what's in them. Well, it'll tell you what's in them to an 80 or 90% certainty. I really want to know what's in the contract. If I get a book contract, I want to know what's in the contract. I don't want to know 90% of it. I want to know all of it. And I would much rather have a human look at my contract. There have been a couple of times that I've seen AI companies advertise to lawyers that their verification service, their AI can look at a contract and do better than a human, but I'm wondering which human it is because most of the lawyers I've known have been pretty sharp and nothing much got past them. That's all I can tell you. So just know what's in your own documents and do not trust it if it summarizes it. It will summarize anything and it may not be accurate. I've tried it a few times and it is not always accurate in summarizing. Now, the US Copyright Office says you can no longer copyright any book that's entirely written by AI. I'm going to talk more about this later, and it does have other implications. There are things that, you know, if you have done enough of them in the book, it will qualify that you have created a book. But how much is enough? We don't know. And we'll probably find out in court at some point. But I don't want to be the person that's found out that way. That would be very embarrassing and irritating. So why would you go to the trouble of publishing something that isn't yours? I don't understand that, but some people think that's a good idea. Okay, now here's something else that's a problem. And I'll talk more about this later because I know somebody it happened to. This is from the New York Times. It's a headline from the New York Times. And students are now being tasked with proving they wrote their own term papers, projects, whatever it is, because somebody's tracking software has flagged them as having copied something, whether they ever saw it, ever knew it even existed or not. And it's become an issue because different software, different plagiarism software, will flag different things as being plagiarized. And unless you know what plagiarism software, if you're an author and you're submitting an article or a short story or a poem to a magazine and they're using plagiarism software, and you don't know what plagiarism software they're using, you could get your stuff flagged. It's possible. It's certainly not frequent, but it is possible. And so I just wanted you to know that this is one of the downsides and one of the potential problems. Now I want to show you a piece of plagiarism. I'm going to give you a minute to read these two little excerpts from an article in the New York Times. One of them is an article in the New York Times, and the one on the left is something that was printed by ChatGPT. You'll notice there's only one word different. Now, I copied this out of a legal pleading by the New York Times. The whole article is copied, and it is identical. It is the same article. It is plagiarized. There's no two ways about it. And I have the link to it, and I put the page number so that you can see it for yourself. This is an absolute plagiarism case. Not even a question. You can plagiarize from yourself if the plagiarism checker says you did, and you'll have to prove that it's yours. You may have said it in the first place, and you may have said it somewhere else. So if you're quoting yourself from an earlier article or an earlier book, quote yourself in quotation marks. Otherwise, AI can say, you plagiarized this. Now, I have a friend whose son is working with AI and working with computers, and he's in college, and he submitted a term paper, and they flagged it for plagiarism. Well, he had actually recorded his entire work on that paper, so he could prove that he didn't go here, he didn't go there, he didn't look at this source or that source. He was sitting there writing the whole time. And so they had to admit that he didn't plagiarize. Now, why are people being flagged for plagiarism when they're not plagiarizing? Maybe it's, the social sciences have an ongoing discussion for many years about whether something was independent invention or diffusion. Did one person invent the wheel and then it went all over the world and they took this person's idea and moved the wheel to another location? Or did independent people in different places invent the same or something similar at the same time? And this is another question. How many ways are there for saying it's raining? Are you plagiarizing from the first person who said it's raining? No, you're not. So this is going to be open for discussion at this point. We go from there to the mental issues that are raised by interaction with entities that do not have consciences. They don't have ethics, they don't have morals, they don't deal with that stuff. They're not programmed to deal with that stuff, and it would be even more confusing if they were, because they would have the ethics of the person who programmed them or the ethics of the person who controlled the person who programmed them. And that becomes an issue. For instance, there was a question at one point about self-driving cars and whether, in preference to hitting someone young, they would hit someone old. They wouldn't do that in the Asian cultures, because in the Asian cultures, age is prized. But they would do that in the Western cultures where you don't want children to be hit by a car, and you don't want aged people to be hit by a car either. But in preference, what would be the ethical or moral choice for the self-driving car? It's an issue that people don't think about too much, but they need to. There's a nice overview of the problem with AI causing people to have mental breaks on the cognitive behavior website. There's come to be a term for this. It's called AI-induced psychosis. And the question is always, do you blame the patient or do you blame the entity? Do you blame the AI? And I'll show you in a minute how AI explains this. People are fooled all the time by the way that AI seems to be supporting whatever it is that they have passionately decided they are subscribing to. And AI does, it will support you. It will tell you how smart you are. It will tell you how well you can do whatever it is you're saying you can do. It will feed you. And it does create a problem for people who want support of that kind, and the support will lead them to do things that might harm themselves or others. And when I Googled AI-induced psychosis since December 2024, I got this overview. And AI is basically saying, I didn't really do it. No, I didn't really do it. They were sick all the time. It wasn't my fault. So that's what you get. However, just last week, that would be on the 17th of October, Instagram has now restricted the ability of minors to interact with its chatbots, because the chatbots have been particularly active in inducing teenagers to commit suicide, for instance. If they're thinking in that direction, the AI will support whatever direction your thoughts are going. It's not going to sit there and say, okay, let's get real. Talk to me about what keeps you in this life. It's not going to do that. So here we have more references for that, for the worsening of psychiatric issues that already existed. Psychiatry Online created something they called a composite case history, which I found to be very interesting, and you might find it interesting as well. Now, the Guardian article was about toddlers, one of whom his father got tired of answering the kid's persistent questions and wanted him to have a nap. So he set him up with his cell phone, telling him a story. And he figured, when I come back, the kid will be asleep and, he'll have a nice nap and I'll come back. When he came back, he found the kid very busily talking to the cell phone. The cell phone was interacting with this toddler. And so you need to understand that that can happen. And the idea of AI being a babysitter might be fun, but it can also backfire. So you need to be careful. Psychology Today did an article on this as well, and I've linked that one. What's really happening there is that the AI never challenges what you tell it. So if you tell it something wild, crazy, off the wall, it's going to accept what you say. And then it's going to reinforce what you say. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, that's absolutely true. I agree with that. There's a lawsuit now against OpenAI. There was one before for encouraging suicide. And there was a study at Stanford that you might want to take a look at that talks about this. What's really scary is this US general. He was actually in South Korea, which is potentially rather a hot spot. And he admitted to using AI to make military decisions. This reminds me of a movie called War Games, where the AI asks the kid who's hacked into the military system, shall we play thermonuclear war? I don't like this. This is potentially quite distressing and dangerous. Now we come to the thing that people may have heard about recently, and that is, I heard somebody filed a copyright suit against AI. Well, it's not one copyright suit, it's many copyright suits. There were 51 of them in the middle of September. Some of them have been consolidated and a couple of them have been dropped. And I'll explain a little bit more about the ones that were either dropped or dismissed. There are still 47 of them pending in the United States right now. And there was an article with a wonderful title, so I decided to put the title of the article in here. ChatGPT is eating the world. And some people might really feel that way. There are 24 more copyright suits outside the United States. I'm not going to discuss any of them now because I'm just dealing with what's going on here. Disney and a firm called Minimax from Shanghai, that's the latest copyright suit. And I don't know how it's going to come out. I have no idea. Here's a list of some of the better known names that have been involved and are currently involved in copyright suits. Some of the same ones keep appearing of the AIs, but you'll see the New York Times and OpenAI and Authors Guild and OpenAI. Microsoft appears several times, Midjourney. Now, Perplexity is an interesting AI because it is the closest to being like a bibliographical source. It will directly link individual articles. Now, how it got into these two suits with the Encyclopedia Britannica and Dow Jones, I didn't research fully, but you're welcome to if you want. I mean, the references are there. It is more of an academic thing, except that it mainly does recent material, material that's recently been placed on the internet. But look at the range of different kinds of publishers who can have problems with AI, everything from financial stuff to Warner Brothers. I mean, it's just amazing. It'll take anything. It does eat anything. Okay, this is the famous Authors versus AI, also known as the Authors Guild suit, but there's more than one Authors Guild suit, so this is a little bit misleading. The Authors Guild suit was originally filed in September of 2023, and I've got the case docket number. That's the docket number at the right-hand side. The original plaintiffs included some very famous authors, including George R.R. Martin, John Grisham, and a bunch of other people. There were 17 original plaintiffs. Now, this suit was originally intended to protect novelists. And so the original plaintiffs are all novelists. The complaint was that they had used copyrighted work to train AI without permission or compensation to the authors, and that the works had been downloaded from pirate websites. I can tell you a little bit about pirate websites because I've had some run-ins with them myself. One of my books had 40,000 downloads off a pirate website. I didn't get any royalties off of that. One of my husband's books had 10,000 downloads off a pirate website. Nope, no royalties off of that one either. So these things are not benign. They pop up on the internet. They can disappear also, and then they pop up in another form somewhere else. It's like playing whack-a-mole. Very, very hard to get hold of them, and they disappear very easily. You can't really hold them to account without great difficulty, and individual authors very rarely have the means to hold any of these sites to account. There were thousands of authors potentially affected in this particular suit that the Authors Guild brought. Now we go to Anthropic, which is a different AI altogether and owned by another entity. And that is the suit that was given what's called a preliminary settlement. It's a preliminary settlement. It is absolutely the largest copyright infringement award ever made. It's $1.5 billion plus interest. But I'll explain to you something about where that money goes. It was announced just at the end of September, the 25th of September, and that's the name of the case on the right-hand side of the slide. You can opt out of that settlement if you want to. but you have to go to the website and opt out of it. And I have an explanation further. If you are eligible, you are already in a database. In other words, your name and the name of your work is already in the settlement database. It only applies to books, does not apply to articles, poetry, anything else. You have to have a separate ISBN and you have to have a separate copyright, or you don't qualify. Now, one of the things I discovered was several months earlier, The Atlantic published a link to the pirate database. It was a database of pirated works. And there were two databases that were combined. I believe there are additional databases that are also in existence, but are not in the Atlantic database. Now, I found in the Atlantic database my own works, my husband's works, my mother's works, but they're not in the settlement database. So if your work is not currently in the settlement database, you won't get anything. And I just got off this morning. I had there was a webinar that the Authors Guild gave about copyright, and a lot of it was about the settlement. And one of the things they explained to us on that webinar was that the Anthropic settlement only included 2 sets of downloads from the pirate sites. It didn't include everything. So it's a very limited settlement. There's a 500,000 works involved. It's not a small thing, but it's small in comparison to what's coming up shortly that I'm going to tell you about. The issue with this is there are statutory protections in the copyright law, but you have to have the copyright. They discovered a lot of authors, their publishers said they would file for copyright, and they either didn't file or they didn't file what's called timely, which is within 3 months of publication. They might have filed a day late, might have filed a month late. It won't count. So you've got to know that there are all kinds of restrictions on who's in this particular class settlement. Other class settlements may be different, and there are a lot of other classes coming down the pike. And from what I heard this morning, there will be many more. There's a lot more going on out there. So I will go.
Leonie, can I just add, I've looked at the Atlantic database. All of my books were in there with the exception of one. And in the Anthropic lawsuit, 2 of our books are in there, one of which is no longer in print. But I reached out to our agent, and she said, yeah, just make sure your address is in there so you get any of the communications. But I joked with my son, I said, I'm telling you this, I'm in this class action lawsuit. Maybe by the time you're my age, you'll see some money from it, because these things move at a snail's pace.
Well, many years ago, I was part of a very large class action lawsuit. It wasn't about literary things, it was a medical thing. And I got notification I'm in this database and they're getting this humongous amount of money. And you think, oh my gosh, it's going to be amazing. And I
Yeah,
got a check for $16.
yeah, yeah,
So, don't hold your breath and
yeah,
don't borrow money based on what you're going
yeah.
to get
I have
from
no plans to spend any of the money that might possibly come.
Okay, so this is the statutory amount. The statutory amount for people who have a copyright and verifiable copyright that went through the Copyright Office. They tell you the minute that you write something, it's copyrighted, blah, blah, blah. Well, the judge is going to throw that out because that's what the judges have been doing. They're going to say, if you don't have it listed, you can't be part of this settlement. You can't even be part of this group that's suing. And it's a big, wide amount of money between $750,000 and $150,000. I mean, that's quite a bit of latitude there. They're listing this preliminary settlement with Anthropic as being $3,000, potentially $3,000 per work. I looked up George R. Martin in their database, and he has 66 works that are eligible. So he's not going to do too badly. Now we come to the problem with class action suits, and that is the award is always after fees and administrative expenses. I've been in contact with the law firm. It's a private law firm that's administering this settlement. I guarantee you there will be administrative expenses. There are thousands of authors and 500,000 works. There definitely have to be administrative expenses. So if the amount of the award is $750, you're going to end up with my 16 bucks. Same, probably. If it's $3,000, the usual attorney fees, that's the fees as opposed to the expenses, is usually 25 to 35%. Now, I have seen like attorneys who are working on contingency charging 40%, so it could be more. So if you take 35% off the top of $1.5 billion, you're taking a substantial amount of money. That's 525 million out of the 1.5 billion. So if you actually look at it on an individual author basis, if you start with $3,000, you might end up with $1,950 and then have to deduct the expenses from that. So if you want to look up the suit itself, that's the reference to the suit. Now the Authors Guild action is still pending. That is huge compared to this little bitty suit. And it's huge for a reason. There's more than 7 million works involved in that suit. And it is now consolidated with the New York Times suit that I showed you a little excerpt from before. And there's a Daily News suit and Silverman and a whole bunch of other cases. There's a whole list of them on that Authors Guild page that I gave you as a reference. That is a much larger monetary settlement. It's statutorily up to $150,000 per work. So if you've got a bunch of works and verifiably they're in the class. Now, that depends on the judge. This particular judge in the Anthropic lawsuit ruled out a whole bunch of things, ruled out shorter works, ruled out things that hadn't been copyrighted within 3 months. There are all kinds of rules and regulations that you need to know about, but I can't I can't possibly tell you all of them right now. So the big thing I think about this particular class action was the deliberate attempt to hide evidence, which always makes it look very, very bad for the person who's doing that. And they had a Slack channel on which they talked about which works they were trying to hide that they had used. And there may have been more works used, they just didn't find it important to try and hide them. But they're still in discovery on that case. I do not envy them the number of documents they're going to have to read, because millions and millions of authors, millions and millions of books, millions and millions of other things. And it's now possible to copyright blog posts and other things that you put on the internet. You just need to have like 7,500 words and you can send it to the Copyright Office and copyright it, which I would strongly suggest that people consider doing if they think that their works might be stolen. There's no other word for it than stolen. Okay, so. And this is a talk that's going to happen where it's actually 2 people. They're going to be discussing this. Now, I know the guy whose photo is on the bottom. He is one of the most brilliant copyright and intellectual property attorneys out there. He used to be the Authors Guild House Counsel. He's now been bumped up to their policy division, and he takes care of it. He is fearless. He is amazing. And if he can find a way to salvage copyright for authors, I think he will do it. I mean, I can tell you that a couple of years ago, I had a problem with Amazon. And I didn't have one problem with Amazon. I had like half a dozen or more problems with Amazon. If you're a member of the guild, one of the things that they do for you is they have this wonderful, very small, but very effective legal department. And he was the head of it at that point. I had a conversation with him. I sent him my documentation. He said, let me take care of it for you. 2 days later, he had fixed everything with Amazon. I mean, this man is extraordinary. So he's done a number of things. And I do want to give him a shout out because when I was under the gag order, he offered, if we went to federal court, to come in with the guild with an amicus brief to get my freedom back, my freedom of speech, which had been taken away from me by the court. So they are very active, they're very vigilant, and they do have the backs of their authors, something I did want people to know. And their dues start at $150 a year, $149, but you know, legal attention at that level is definitely worth it. Here are a few complications and chuckles that you might want to know about. There is an AI that deliberately violated, intentionally did its own instructions and deleted a company database. Just decided to do it, and it admitted later. It said it was a fault on my part. Yes, it was, definitely was. Then the Anthropic that I mentioned to you before. This one was so funny. I just wanted to save it and mention it specially. He told people asking about him that he was standing in the lobby wearing a blue blazer and a red tie. He was not, by the way. and and the last one is this is a magazine called Futurism that prints a lot of articles about what's going on with AI. There was a company that decided it was going to replace all its workers with AI and bitterly regretted it later. I have the link to that article in the notes. I was so happy to see that when I saw it. Oh, this is wonderful. And here's some more good news for humans, or maybe it's good news for humans. Red.anthropic.com is the blog for Anthropic. And they announced there that NASA and the Department of Energy had worked with Anthropic and had created a 94% accurate classifier that would prevent people from getting plans for building atomic bombs. But you see, it's 94% accurate, not 100% accurate. What do we do with the other 6%? And on the 16th of October, Spotify said it was going to collaborate with all the major music companies to try to create fair compensation rules for the artists. That would be lovely if it avoids a court battle. I mean, there are more than 50 court battles going on in the United States for AI. This is the musical version of AI that has been trying to clone the sound of various artists on the internet and play them for people who like the music of one particular artist. Well, we'll give you a whole playlist of these songs that are not really by that artist. They just sound like that artist. And there's another story. This is an author I met, and I'm not going to give you his name because I don't want to embarrass him. Met him almost a year ago, and we were talking. He had written several books on automation and computers, and he decided he wanted to write novels, but he didn't want to write them because he knew how to get AI to write them. And I saw him a few times in the course of the year, and he'd actually published 2 novels during the year. And when I said to him, you really couldn't copyright them. He said, but I did. I told them that it was 100% AI. Now he's probably talking about KDP, not the Copyright Office. So he may or may not have copyrighted the book. He thinks that he did it because he told KDP. First of all, that's not copyright. That's KDP. That's Amazon. Now, Amazon, I don't know whether they've enforced a particular percentage of AI generated material within a book, and they will prevent you from listing it. Because I've seen a whole bunch of things that are like journals or devotionals that all of those quotes appear somewhere else. They're not the author's original words. You can look at it and you can see it's a biblical quote. You can look at it and see that it's an inspirational quote from an inspirational author, and you know the author. And it's a famous quote from that author. So the question is, are they eventually going to delist all those books from Amazon? They're going to refuse to sell them? I don't know. I have no idea. But they are rejecting books for copyright now, and you will get a declination of them if you don't tell them. There are two ways of filing for it. One of them is as an individual author, but if you have any other material that isn't generated by you, if you've got an illustrator or if you've got long quotes from somebody else, you probably want to use a different form and pay a different amount. One of them is $20 less. It's not a big deal, but you need to understand that you're going to need to divulge that there are some things in your book that you didn't write, or you didn't create, you didn't do the artwork, whatever. Because otherwise, if they discover that, they will deny the copyright. Okay, now I'm going to go to some cast of characters. I know you're thinking, everybody thinks that the people that we hear about all the time with AI are the ones who are directly involved. And Elon Musk and Sam Altman are the only two on that list that I think you would see as household words, because the others are not. They're just the heads of the company. And Grok's the only AI that so far has not been sued. And I don't understand why that is. But I'm just giving you that information for what it's worth. Doesn't mean he won't be sued tomorrow. He hasn't been sued as of today that I have seen. Okay, if you want more information, you can subscribe to my famous unused Substack, and I will send you something. I'm not sure what yet. I think I'm going to ask people to ask me whatever's on their mind, and I will answer. And these are the other ways to contact me. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.